Hello everyone and welcome to the Bookish Report. My name is AB Frank, but just call me Alex. And on the Bookish Report I talk mainly about gaslamp horror and gaslamp fantasy, exactly like what I'm going to be talking about today, which is Carmilla, the vampire story by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. This was published in a magazine serialised at the end of 1871 and into early 1872. The magazine was called The Dark Blue. Never heard of it. I ordered this book from Amazon. It is an Amazon print, so you typically expect a book to turn up from Amazon, and it's just a regular book. Looks like these books. Normal. That is a book. That is a book. So imagine my surprise then when this nightmare turned up. This is horrifying. Oh, Amazon print. It's not let us down. Curly. And also, just look at the writing is ginormous. There's massive margins for some reason. Loads of wasted paper. It's enormous. It's like a magazine. But actually, on the face of it, it looks terrible. Feels terrible. It's actually worse than that, though. So, how do I mean? It's worse than what I've already shown you? Here we go then. So what's bad about this is that it's like it was taken by somebody whose first language isn't English, translated into another language, which maybe also wasn't their first language. And then that translation was then taken by somebody else, a third party, whose first language was not English, and translated back into English. And it's like there was a thesaurus used to replace words with similar words, but the context was never taken into account when these words were replaced. So there's like with a lot of books and stuff from this period in time, there's a bit of melodrama. So there's a line or some part of a line which is, "Oh, dear Carmilla," whatever. After that, the word "dear" in here was replaced with the word "expensive." Oh, expensive Carmilla. And I know there was a lot of these changes because I was listening to the audiobook. It's on YouTube. It's only about 3 hours. I was listening along whilst reading it. I sped up the audio so it was as fast as I can read. But it was hard to follow along because of all the changed words in there. And also in this, there's a lot of new sentences and new paragraphs that don't start with a capital letter. Rubbish. But that aside, is a good story. It's not that long either, so when I get onto character work, I'll explain, some characters. It's not long enough for them to have been, to get any credit for the author. But so we have a first-person narrator called Laura, who's, I think, about 17, a teenage girl. And she lives in a creepy sort of isolated castle in Styria with her dad. I think her mum died not too long before, or maybe a bit longer, a few years before, but she lives now with her dad and like whatever staff they have. I think he's quite well off. So early in the story, she is telling us about an experience she remembers when she was 6, when she felt that there was a beautiful woman in her bedroom, and then she feels a piercing, two punctures in her chest, and there's no that those wounds were never found, though. They were never discovered. So it's like that they never happened, that it may have been a dream. And then the vampire Carmilla turns up after a carriage accident outside the castle, which seems a bit odd in hindsight. I mean, not odd as in like bad writing, as in like what was a carriage doing passing by this isolated castle. It's gone a bit off the main track, don't you think? So Carmilla's mother says she's got to go somewhere for 3 months and leaves Carmilla with Laura and her family, or her dad and the staff and what have you in the castle. And Carmilla and Laura recognise each other from this dream that Laura had when she was 6. And they become quite close over the story, or over the earlier parts of the story, sometimes romantically close. Though Carmilla's quite secretive and Laura doesn't really question this, so she's not the dominant one in this arrangement. And Carmilla has like these mood swings, mood changes with her, and she's very secretive about her family. She doesn't speak about family or her past. And then in a nearby town, young women start to mysteriously die from an unknown illness. And then Laura starts to have some weird dreams again, where she thinks there's a cat-like beast in her room and feels puncture marks again in her chest, and this cat-like thing sort of turns reforms as a woman and then leaves, like I think just walks through the door. And then of course Laura starts to become ill with this mysterious thing that's gone around killing the other young women in the nearby towns. So basically that is it before I tell you the entire story. It's not a long story, so I don't really want to go much more into it. So anyway, we'll go on, like I was going to say at the start, the character work. I think Laura's a fine character in the short space of time that we've got with her. Carmilla is not to the extent of the creepy locals who don't tell Arthur Kipps anything in The Woman in Black, but she is creepy with like withholding information and being really secretive. And I thought that was done quite well. It is a short book, and I need to reiterate that it doesn't take long to read unless you're reading my copy. You've got to retranslate it into the original form. So Laura's going through this phase where she wants a companion, and she obviously likes girls. And the girl in this is a bit hot and cold with the mood changes. It's Carmilla. She's the one that's in charge of whatever is going to happen anyway. And I found that to be an interesting dynamic. But apart from those two, there's the other characters that aren't in it long enough, because it's only so short that they're not in it long enough for them to shine as characters. So I'm not saying that's a criticism, it's just an observation from reading it. I really like the prose. I thought the writing was great. It's gothic, it's very well paced, it was quick. And there's a lot of vampire lore in this story as well. So the introduction of the vampire, when we first sort of realise, oh, this is the vampire, it's slick and it's fast. And the vampire was described as having this seductive presence. Even Laura describes her as the most beautiful. And so this is what vampires are, isn't it? This is vampire lore, because they have that allure about them. They draw people in. And this is another reason probably why Laura is not the dominant one, because she's sort of letting all the secrecy and the mood changes slide, probably because of this allure of the vampire, the seductiveness. And there's some old portraits that come around from somewhere, which I forget where, but there's one of them that looks awfully like Carmilla, but from generations before, and Carmilla's a teenage girl like Laura, so it can't possibly be her, but she looks very, very similar. And the name on this portrait is an anagram of Carmilla, so I thought that was done quite well. I thought that was a creepy element to it, a bit of mystery as well for the characters to work out. And I mentioned earlier that Laura says she recalls from a dream like a cat-like beast in her room that turned into a woman, so that lore of vampires being able to shapeshift and being really quick was also included in this story. And at some point, Laura's family or dad or one of the staff mention that they've observed that she doesn't come down until later in the afternoon, probably for some daylight related reason. I thought the themes of the lesbian relationship was handled really well. There's not any graphic lesbianics going on, so don't worry about that if you didn't want to read that. Or if you did want to read that, then you're not going to get it from this story. In the 1870s, that probably wouldn't have gone down well, when these are young women supposed to be ladies in waiting, to marry and have kids with some earl or some duke from somewhere. In this story, the reason that they can't have the relationship is never because that they're lesbians, because they're two women. The lesbian side of it is never seen as negative. They can't be in a relationship because, for a legitimate reason really, one is a vampire. Although there is the option of turning Laura into a vampire, and there's even a line from Carmilla which is this: die together so they can live together, suggesting that she is going to turn her into a vampire, because these dreams would suggest that she's been feeding off Laura, so maybe she is trying to turn her. Some good gothic themes in this as well, with the isolated castle. That's really, really cool. It's not really played on a lot, but it's mentioned, so you know about it and you can picture it and it's there. Also, obviously, the vampire is a supernatural figure, so there's that part of the gothic literature which I really enjoyed. And this was 26 years before Dracula, so this definitely influenced Bram Stoker in his writing of Dracula. Laura and her dad, because she's ill, I think they're on the way to a town to see a doctor to see what they can do about this illness that she's got, because she's been bitten by the vampire. And on the way they meet this character called General Spieldorf, and he is very similar to Abraham Van Helsing from Dracula. So that definitely does influence in Dracula in some way, because he's had his own experience with a vampire, and so he starts to teach them about vampires and stuff like that, and how they're gonna maybe solve the problem. Talks about staking through the heart and beheading. And that's also in Dracula, if I remember rightly. However, I do really like the ambiguous ending, which I won't spoil for you if you haven't read this story yet, but that's quite satisfying. The ending is not definite. So that's going to do it. And while I do recommend this novella, is a novella, I don't recommend my copy. My copy is going straight into the paper recycling bin. No. I'll stake it through the heart and then it's going in the paper recycling bin. If you're still here at this point, I'm going to read out a few more of the word changes words that were replaced with other words that are completely out of context. Get this rubbish back over here. So there were some that there was no reason to change. The context did work as well. As odd was replaced with strange. Beautiful replaced with stunning. Town was replaced with metropolis. Answered was replaced with spoke back. Thought was replaced with concept. Late was replaced with overdue. Enjoy was replaced with experience. His features was replaced with his functions. Terrible. One last look before it goes to book hell. Anyway, that's my review of Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. If you enjoyed this review, if you enjoyed this video, if you like some of the books that'll be similar to that I'll be talking about on the channel in the future, a Dracula review coming up at some point in August, and consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.